Now, as we told you today, the Premier, Annastacia Palaszczuk, has announced there now will be a state government inquiry into, the failures of our forensic testing lab here in Queensland. We brought you this story last week, and I said to you at the time, potentially this could be the worst failure at a crime lab in Australian history. Police have been reviewing hundreds of rape cases dating back to 2018 because our state government-run lab refused to test DNA, which would help identify sex offenders. Now, this has all come about because of some good work by the Australian newspaper, and we did speak to Hedley Thomas, the Australian newspaper reporter, on that last week. This was an investigation into the murder of Mackay woman Shandee Blackburn. Now, her ex-boyfriend was acquitted of that murder, but questions have been raised about the reliance of forensic testing in that case. The $6 million inquiry will be headed up by former Court of Appeal President Walter Sofronoff and could take up to 6 months for results to be handed down. I'm joined now by Borne University criminologist and former detective Terry Goldsworthy. Terry, good to have you back on 4BC Drive.
Yeah, thanks, Scott.
Now, this inquiry was the Premier dragged kicking and screaming to announce it today?
Yeah, look, I think this particular issue in relation to the murder of Shandee Blackburn has been bubbling along now for some months at least. I can remember commenting on this months ago, saying that there appeared to be serious deficiencies with some of the forensic investigation that took place and that it was worthy of review. So I think better than later than never, but this should have happened months ago, and I don't know why the government has vacillated so long in coming to this conclusion.
Now, this all comes back to the testing standards that at least what we understand at least, is that the state-run forensic lab wasn't proceeding with DNA testing and profiling because it felt that there wasn't enough data involved in it. Now, but the standards they were putting on themselves was far higher than occurs in other states. So potentially there's a lot of DNA profiling that wasn't occurring that potentially could have happened and would have happened in other states.
Yeah, that's right, Scott. And I guess, for your viewers' kind of information, what we're talking about here is what we call miscarriages of justice. So that's where there's a less than optimal outcome from the criminal justice system. And usually we're concerned with, innocent people going to jail. In the case of Blackburn, we're concerned about someone who was guilty escaping and a culpable person getting away from going to punishment for what they did. So it's what we call air of impunity. And if you look at some data that we've done over this period of years, about 30% of miscarriages of justice or wrongful convictions, etc., in Australia came through forensic errors. So forensics is not a new place in terms of errors and trying to tighten these things up. But what he said is quite correct. In terms of standards, I'm quite confused as to why Queensland would be operating different standards, given that we have a national standard system that looks at accreditation of laboratories, certification of the scientists that work within, and standards in terms of methodology and reporting for forensic laboratories.
All right, let's take this one step into the future. There's a 6-month inquiry by Walter Sofronoff, $6 million inquiry. It comes down and finds that, the DNA testing either wasn't done or wasn't done properly. How crucial going forward then could the review of that evidence be in cases like, for instance, the murder of Shandee Blackburn? Now, her ex-boyfriend was acquitted in that case. Now, there used to be the rule of double jeopardy, that you couldn't be tried again for a crime that you have gone to trial for. But those rules were changed about 15 years ago here in Queensland, where now if there is fresh and compelling evidence, you could be retried. Is DNA that kind of evidence that could see someone be retried even if they've been found not guilty previously?
Yeah, I believe it is. I do think these are the kind of cases that were designed to be captured by the introduction of that double jeopardy law, which only applies in very restricted matters. But nonetheless, I guess it was initially put in place to deal with developments in the improvement of DNA analysis. What we're seeing here is that it may well be used to go back and capture those cases where the basic analysis wasn't done properly and interpretation of the results, etc., and the reporting wasn't up to the normal standard that we thought it may have been. So there's going to be, I think, some severe repercussions for the criminal justice system in terms of perhaps extra workload that will come onto the police to go and do these cold case reviews. that may come out of the Commission of Inquiry, and then you may have a whole plethora of trials taking place again through the Supreme Court for murders that came back as innocent or no one charged, that we'll now have to try and clean up. So it's going to be problematic, and it needs to be done because this goes to the very heart of the legitimacy of the criminal justice system. And if we don't have faith that our criminal justice system is legitimate and functioning properly, then we have problems.
Well, I did say in the opening that we're talking here about possibly the worst failure at a crime lab in Australian history. And in terms of cases here, we're not just talking about a dozen or 20 or 30. We're talking here potentially hundreds of cases where either someone hasn't been charged and convicted because there wasn't a DNA profile done, or because they were charged but were let off because it wasn't done properly. Potentially we're talking about hundreds of cases that could be re-looked at. It's cold cases where people could potentially be out on the streets free at the moment, where otherwise they would be behind jail.
Well, that's correct. And I mean, it comes back to issues of competence. I mean, we look at America as a great place to look at forensic problems there with their crime labs. They've had any number of problems. Some of them range from deliberate misconduct just through to simple incompetence from people who don't know what they're doing. In this case, I haven't seen any allegations of deliberate misconduct, although I suspect this Commission of Inquiry will be quite free-ranging and wide-ranging. So sit back and watch what comes out would be my advice, because I think we're going to see a lot more concerning material come out of this than perhaps we've seen to date.
Terry Goldsworthy, appreciate you joining us on 4BC Drive this afternoon.
Thanks, Scott.